We're finding the best ideas come from getting in there and getting dirty and working side by side with customers in the trench to figure out what has the highest impact. And you have to be able to do that with a safety net. I think part of what we're doing when we set up our data strategy for our customers is creating an environment that lets them experiment and discover where the hidden treasures are and all of that.
From Altvia, this is Preferred Return, your opportunity to learn from the brightest minds in the private capital market. Ready to own your technology edge? Let's get you that preferred return. Everyone is talking about data, data lakes, data warehouses, data. At Altvia, we're leveraging AI to transform your data into truly actionable insights. With data popping up everywhere you look, we decided it was time to fully define what data is, why having a data strategy is critical to your business, and why having the right partner is essential for getting the most out of your data. And what better person to explain all of that than Jef Rice, aka 1F Jef, Altvia's head of engineering. In this replay episode of Preferred Return, Jef simplifies complex data concepts, offering clear insights into the buzzword-heavy world of data and how to approach it strategically to drive meaningful investments while maximizing your most valuable resource, your time.
Welcome to Preferred Return, Jef Rice. I'm going to refer to you henceforth as 1F Jef. I refer to you that way on a day-to-day basis at work. But welcome, man. It's an honor to have you on the pod.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
You joined us recently. It probably feels like it was longer than it actually is. But why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about your background and how you came to be working with me and the rest of the folks that we work with?
Sure. Yeah. Coming up on my year anniversary. It's been 100 years of my first year, but good stuff here. I've been doing this for a while, so I've had the pleasure of starting a couple companies myself. I had a startup in LA that built and hosted mobile websites for sites like the LA Times and Chicago Tribune and a bunch of celebrity sites like Britney Spears and Kim Kardashian, and sort of my first introduction into a lot of data because we managed to serve about 1 billion page views a month with that little startup. And as you know, like startups are this weird combination of challenging and rewarding, but kind of love that environment. Got my first introduction to fintech by overseeing data operations and DevOps for a company that facilitated about $1 billion in monthly early payments for Fortune 100 companies, and kind of got to understand how complex and high stress some of the large scale financial data management could be. And then most recently, I played a role at ZipRecruiter and helped them scale their enterprise product and engineering efforts up through a successful IPO. And one of my teams was responsible for building a data intelligence system that tracked 15 million data points over 250,000 sources. So at Altvia, like I said, I joined a little less than a year ago and excited about the opportunity to build innovative, scalable technology solutions and work with a team that is one of the best teams I've ever had the pleasure to work with from that standpoint, and just sort of help ensure that our systems meet current needs but anticipate future needs and challenges that our customers present us with, and make sure that we're at like the forefront of advancements in the industry.
Love that. You're head of engineering. You're running our engineering team.
That's right.
I agree. I think this is an amazing team. Super fun. And, from my perspective, the evolution of the team has been amazing. And I'm going to come back to this and we'll talk more about it. But one of the things that I was thinking as you said that is, it feels from like the way you and I work together and the sort of things we're working on, for me, there's this, kind of back to kind of startup vibes a little bit in the sense of like moving quickly and trying things and stuff like that. And I hadn't, that was early days of Altvia for sure. It was ever present and to an extreme degree, and feels like it was sort of missing for a little bit, but it's good to be back. I guess we talk about it now. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of like a thing for you, right? I mean, that's part of your ethos is what I'm feeling based on what I know about you.
Yeah. I mean, not only do I kind of behave that way, and I think kind of enjoy behaving that way, but I've seen it at scale because ZipRecruiter was that way, where we just oriented ourselves to be able to move quickly, fail fast, test a lot of stuff out, figure out what works, double down on it, and sort of keep serving the customer. And I think, Altvia is actually better positioned in a lot of ways than ZipRecruiter was, because even though Zip was very sort of customer first, data driven strategy, Altvia has this like superpower where we're not just building the car, but we're actually along for the road trip too. We're like saddling up with our customers, and we get really into how they do their business, how they think about the world. And I think that gives us a unique opportunity to sort of have insights that other companies wouldn't. So part of the stress and things that we're trying to do right now is just like get ourselves positioned so that we can try a whole bunch of stuff really quickly and figure out what has the highest impact and then do more of it. So
I'll confess something, which is that from time to time, and this is the thing for me that perhaps I've made up, but it's like maybe pushing the limits of like trying to move quick on this thing, or perhaps it's just that sometimes I can be a bit of a hacker, and that you and I know that we've talked about that before, but I love hearing that formally out of you because it makes me feel like maybe I have something to rewind and be like, well, you said on the podcast that we got to move fast and try this.
That's okay.
And that's what I'm doing.
Yeah, no. I mean, we try to support all of that. We're finding the best ideas come from getting in there and getting dirty and working sort of side by side with customers in the trench to figure out what has the highest impact. And you have to be able to do that with a safety net. I think part of what we're doing when we set up our data strategy for our customers is creating an environment that lets them experiment and discover where the hidden treasures are and all of that. But also like part of that discovery comes from the fact that like you're going to fail a lot in figuring it out. And if it's expensive to fail, you're going to be reluctant to even try because I don't want to do this if it's going to take a month and then it's not going to work out. But if you can do it in a day and see if it has value, then you're okay with the fact that like 4 out of 5 things are not going to pan out. You can move on to the next thing really quickly. And I think the phase of technology that we're in right now with AI sort of emerging is in sync with that idea, because like nobody knows what AI is going to do. We just know that it's exciting and it's going to move really quickly and evolve really quickly. And if we have to pick a winner today, we're probably going to be wrong. But if we can experiment with certain things and try certain things out in a way that doesn't take too much time or cost too much money, then ultimately we're going to be more successful down the road.
Love it. What is it that excites you about data? Why are you doing what you're doing?
Aside from the fact that I feel like I'm marginally decent at it, I think I started my career off on the sort of front end side of things as a developer, and I enjoy that. I went through sort of a CRM phase, which feels like a teenage goth sort of phase sometimes. But, like data is really where it's at. I think data is super powerful. I've seen a couple of different companies that took it. Like I truly believe that the reason ZipRecruiter went from when I joined them, we were at like 150 million in revenue. And when I left, we were well over $1 billion and had IPO'd and everything else. And it's because we harnessed the power of the data to make decisions. And everybody talks about it, but we truly didn't do anything unless we could track it and measure it and prove that it was working. And we were as fast to like throw away an idea as we were to implement an idea. And sometimes I was telling somebody the other day about this, like we would test stuff by putting a button on a page, and the button didn't do anything. And we were just tracking to see if we could get people to click the button at all, knowing that we were like potentially hurting the experience for the people who did click the button and expected it to do something.
ZipRecruiter's always broken.
We wanted,
buttons never work. Yeah.
Yeah. Seriously, but when you're doing 1 million unique visitors a day and 10,000 of them get a bad button, it's not the end of the world. We had a scale that we could deal with from that standpoint, but the real takeaway is data unlocked that capability to be able to say like, hey, we're willing to try anything. The best ideas are going to come from places that you don't expect, and in a lot of cases, you're a walking, breathing example of this is like you go into a scenario with a theory And then you pivot on that when the data sort of informs you that that thing you were thinking isn't right, but hey, there's this other thing. And you might end up at the other end of the tunnel with a completely different conclusion than you walked into it with, but ultimately you found a way to turn that into value for a customer. And, that's the sort of attitude that I think leads to, like, whether it's like a market shortcut or it's some unique insight or it's fresh perspective on things. You can't just have hey, we've got 3 people that are experts and they're the only ones that can come up with it. Data is exciting to me because, and especially with a data strategy, I want it to be democratized as much as possible, put it in the hands of people that have a wide set of experiences and thought process and perspective, and then let the data prove out whether it's a good idea or whether it's, stupid.
I was thinking before we jumped on that maybe for the first time I had taken a moment to think, and I was like, I think what my experience working with you thus far at this company has been on data is that I think the spirit you've brought was like, we can do that. It was almost this like, let's do that and figure out what's going on there because we can. It's not that hard. And that's like really, really refreshing. That's why I say, like, getting back to that kind of startup feel that I experienced, it was like, yeah, let's figure that out. And then you go through this period of like, well, I don't know, we may not have resources to do that. And then maybe you have certain people in certain positions that don't have the same experience and skills and stuff like that. And so whatever the reason is, and no judgment against any of those things, but the mentality you brought in terms of data is very much like, yeah, we can do that. And that's maybe kind of what some of the anxiety, I guess I feel sometimes is like, let's, do that. And you're like, hey, cool, let's do it. And it's extremely freeing. And the alternative or the opposite is extremely limiting in terms of opportunities and what people can do, what our customers can do working with us, what we can do as a company, all those things, when you sort of take the limit off and open the opportunity, it's really exciting. Is that fair? Do you feel like you bring that spirit?
I certainly like to say yes and figure it out. I think everybody's approach should be yes until we find out we can't. Like, I'd much rather die on the hill than decide not to climb at all. That's just the approach that I honestly, like, I think, what do we have to lose? It's just data.
It's data. Nobody's dying yet. Nobody's bleeding yet. And
that's right.
Very few people have their feelings hurt too. So, I mean, it's, there's really nothing to lose. Yeah. And I was going to say, like, from, to compare or contrast my perspective, I mean, I have been, over the last, 9 months or so, however long you've been here, I have felt certainly re-energized and very stimulated. I mean, one thing that I know very well, and many people that are forced to work with me as well, is I'm a learner. I've taken these personality assessments, these strengths finders and stuff like that. And one constant in all of them is I love to learn, and I will, go down these rabbit holes and stay up all night for days on end, just because the sort of energy I get is more from the learning. And so as it relates to, your time here, the stuff that I've learned has been amazing, extremely stimulating, but that's not necessarily the thing I like about data. I mean, I'm like learning about a lot of tools and a lot of process and stuff like that as we go. But the thing that, to get back to kind of what I feel you bring in the spirit of data and data strategy versus me is like, I really like finding the ponies in there and coming up with things. And then the learning is this, sort of gravy on top. But in terms of a formal acknowledgement, I'll add thank you for that, man. Thank you for coming to work here.
No, it works out because I feel like the personality tests I've taken, I'm more of an enabler. I get pleasure from seeing other people get in there and find the ponies and find the treasure and learn something new. And the more that we can make that happen, the better off we're going to be.
Interesting. Love that. Like, what was it that, caused ZipRecruiter really to like separate itself? Was it like the result of the data and the strategy, you were a part of enabling?
Part of it was also us being able to do more for less. The founders of ZipRecruiter, as it turns out, are still very risk averse. And so they wanted to make sure that the things that we were building and delivering to customers had maximum impact. So we didn't just build on a hunch. We wanted to prove that those things would work. So almost everything started from the standpoint of like a scientific experiment where you're thinking like, I've got a thesis or a theory, and now here's how I'm going to prove it. And here's how I'm going to measure that to show that I'm right or wrong. And what's the sort of minimum amount of work I have to do to get to a place where the data can start to prove that out. And it allowed us to really rapidly build a set of tools that were different from what you would have gotten if you did your typical sort of product management approach to the world, which is like, well, let's start by looking at what all of our other customers have, and we'll put together a big long list and a matrix of it, and then we'll stack rank it, and then that's what we'll go build. We didn't worry about what any of the other competitors had in the market. We just cared about what is going to move the needle for us, with either more visitors that are, job seekers that cared about finding a job, or more employers that, cared about finding good candidates. And we were sort of with blinders on, and our only sort of guiding light was the data that showed whether the experiments we were running were successful or not. And that made it very unique. I don't think we worried about what anybody else was doing, including, the Indeeds of the world, who were 10 times bigger than we were. We just worried about what made our customers happy and what brought them value and made them come back and use our service.
Love it. All right, let's talk about data strategy. We talked about like what's exciting about data. I mean, that this is one of those things, it's a bit buzzwordy, right? I mean, I think if we weren't having this AI moment, which you referred to, then, data strategy might still be this overused, cringeworthy term being used. And anytime you have one of those, if you're me, you're like, all right, well, can we agree upon a common definition of such thing before we actually start talking about it? So how would you define a data strategy? Like, just very generically, whatever comes to mind. I mean, what is it to you?
Just understanding all the data that makes up the various systems that you need to run your business. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's terribly complicated from that standpoint. I think it is boring, and certainly when you approach it from the standpoint of, like, in our industry, of the thing that people have historically thought about data, it's about quality, security, compliance, governance. And if we want to put the listeners to sleep, we can talk about that for half an hour, and it's boring. And then you get into sort of normalization or standardization, and that's equally boring. It's not about the data. It's about what you can do with the data. It's about getting the data easily in front of the people that know how to manipulate it. It's like, I don't necessarily know how to do that, but you know how to do that. So how can I get our data in front of you, and then you can go and experiment and do exciting stuff with it? That's the data strategy to me, is how do I get, I've been gathering data in a bunch of different silos, whether it's CRM or it's my accounting system or it's my portal or my website or portfolio management or whatever. I've got all these different silos, and all of those things are pumping out data. How do I put it all together in a way that allows me to get more value than I'm currently getting out of it? Because I know it works for tactical stuff, but how do I turn it into like a strategic asset? And that to me is the strategy piece of it.
Yes, love that. Well, let's talk about some of the things that we're doing strategically to enable the possibility of arriving at understanding things that you wouldn't otherwise from that data when it's siloed, and being capable of doing things and what have you. So right off the bat, like a term that comes to mind that's been used a lot is data lake.
In all honesty, it's not a whole lot different than a database or a data warehouse. It's just cheaper and easier, and that's really what spawned the evolution of moving from a database to a data warehouse, and from a data warehouse to a data lake, was just cost. In a lot of places, and ZipRecruiter was no different. We generated something in the range of a terabyte of information every day. And putting that in a database and having that database server have to be scaled to its physical limits costs a lot of money. And then where can we put this data that will still allow it to be actionable and queryable and combinable into interesting places, but doesn't cost a lot of money? And that's where this concept of data lake came in. And it was sort of evolved to, I won't say invented, but certainly evolved to, 6 or 8 years ago, and as a way for these big companies that were starting to just pump out data to sort of scale and be able to do that without being buried under infrastructure costs. But ultimately, it's the next evolution of a data warehouse where you can bring all your operational data in one place, make sure that you've got high quality, start treating data like a product instead of just a byproduct of the things that you're doing, and boringly sort of managing security and compliance and governance and all of those things, and then get in there and discover cool stuff that you can do with the data.
Let's categorize it as like pre-data conceptually. This old school idea, right? Like the status quo of what kind of data management maybe had been versus what it can be now, and some association, I suppose, to data lakes for reasons I'll mention here in a second. But I just have this visual of like data warehouses. I imagine like Amazon. Like I see like front loaders and forklifts, and like everything's nice and tidy, like such that the robots just kind of like zip back and forth and like grab the thing. And that's all cool because that's like very futuristic and automated and all that sort of stuff. But what's cool about the automation and the robots is like you see the cool part there when you're there. You don't see all the pain and the heavy lift associated with like keeping that place tidy and like staying out of the robot lanes and getting run over by robots and stuff. And so if that's like the visual of the like sort of data warehouse kind of status quo had been, my visual of data lakes is like this, like really kind of lake proper, like a free flowing thing where it's like you just kind of dump stuff in there. You don't have to worry too much and put all this effort into neatly managing all of it and organizing it as it comes in, and therefore limiting maybe the potential. It's just like, just get it in there. And when you need something from there, you go figure it out, and it's going to be in there because like it was in there. It just, you didn't have to like spend all the time and effort to define exactly where it was going to go and how it was going to be structured, and then find out later on that, that limited your ability to do this other thing, with it. And then the extending the lake concept, like it can kind of free flow out and maybe do other things, other places too, instead of its point being for people to go in there and like get it. Fair?
Absolutely fair. It's actually a very good visual. The data warehouse is very structured. And honestly, like the single purpose of a data warehouse is to combine the data in a place that you can get to it easily. And which is fine. It's very good at that, but it does take a fair amount of coordination. As you said, like I have to have robots and forklifts and all of this sort of understanding of the data ahead of time, which does make it more efficient than a database, but it still means that it's limited in a lot of ways. And I think over the course of the last sort of 10 years, we've started to see data as other stuff. It's not just rows in a database or cells in a spreadsheet. It also is like video. It's also freeform text. It's unstructured data. It's all these other things. And so the data lake opens that up to say, bring all of it. It's way more inclusive. It's saying like everything is data at the end of the day. But we also acknowledge like the nice part about a data lake is that it also builds that process of discovery into the infrastructure itself. With a warehouse, you have to know what's coming in because you're going to create a structure for it. It's the equivalent of having to put up a shelf. And then when I'm putting up this shelf, the first thing I'm going to ask you is like, what am I storing on the shelf? How big are the boxes? What are the dimensions? And then I plan it nicely. And like you said, it will end up on there and it'll be ordered and beautiful. With a data lake, it just says like, bring the data as it is. And the first thing I want to do is just get it there. Second thing I'm going to do is clean it up. And then I'm going to go through this pause period where I just discover. I'm just going to explore the data. I'm just going to see what's in there. I've never seen it in this perspective before. And once I figure that out, now I'm going to have a single purpose I want to use that data for. It might be an aggregation, it might be a calculation, but it's going to end up in a separate table that's single purpose. And it will allow the data to continue to grow and evolve in its sort of raw format, but it also allows me to start to build purpose and value on top of that and understand that this is like an ongoing thing. Data warehouse feels very sort of like, do this, get this. Data lake is much more, Not sure what we're going to get, but we know there's going to be a point in time where we wish we would have collected this data a year ago instead of today. So let's just get it in there, and then we'll figure out what to do with it and build value in a way that's isolated and high quality and all of those sorts of things.
Yes, love it. I mean, I'm going to keep going with this metaphor, the analogy.
Sure.
Like,
do it.
You can't just dump your data off at the, sort of door of the warehouse, because the robots will get all tripped up and the whole warehouse will break. And then you find out that the space you do have to put it in, you got to get all this machinery and put it up there and stuff. And then, oh, by the way, there isn't enough height for that part of the data. So, and, the business user's like, okay, fine. Well, we have this timeline we got to do this on, and we're already behind it. So, just don't bring that in. Data lake, it's like, just dump it. We'll figure it out. You are only aware of the things you're aware of. And that's very limiting conceptually in theory. Yeah. Yes. And versus this just, dump it there. And we can know what we know we want at this point. To your point, let's, kind of start to build some flow into it, some direction that the lake is, flowing in. But it doesn't mean that we are no longer able to kind of still discover things we don't know yet that we want to do, and that we no longer can in the warehouse because the height of where we're storing it, forces to make a decision to not bring that data.
I mean, another sort of good analogy is, imagine that you were tasked to cook dinner for yourself and all your friends, but you weren't allowed to go inside a grocery store. You're only allowed to walk up to a window and tell them, all right, here are the ingredients I need. You're just going to ask them for stuff you know how to cook. But what if you were allowed to go in the store and just wander around and see what they have? And oh man, I'd love that. I'd love to be able to do something with that spice or do something with this ingredients and just play around with it. And, the results from both of those things are yes, there will be value, but it's a very different experience. And with the data lake, it assumes that you don't know everything you want to know before you enter into this process. And the data warehouse sort of demands that you know quite a bit before you enter into the process, because you have to set up the structure. And so, like we talked about at the beginning, it means that experimentation is hard with data warehouse because the startup cost is really high. Whereas with a data lake, it's not high. They bring your garbage, throw it all in there, we'll make some sense out of it and see if we can find some value. And if we don't, no big deal. Maybe we will next week, but we didn't today. We didn't lose a whole lot in trying different things out. And that's I think the value of why we spend so much time thinking about data and data lakes and all of that.
Well, and so I think one other thing that be remiss to not discuss here, and just kind of the concept of messaging, going to continue to extend the lake metaphor, perhaps inappropriately if I haven't already have, but I'll do it by saying, I certainly don't want to imply this is exclusive to data lakes versus data warehouses, but I'll come back and tie the knot on why I think data lakes are better at it. But it allows you to almost kind of sort of set up entry points into the lake and say, hey, this certain water is coming through here now, and then take some sort of action only when that type of water comes into the lake. And then on the other end of it, it could be when that type of water comes in here, we need to let certain other type of water out and build the rules almost like a monitoring system that's keeping track of it. Whereas that's stuff that you could do in a data warehouse, but the need to really define and structure all the stuff as you kind of load it into the warehouse and create your space and use the forklifts to put it up where it's going, and then this other stuff there, again, falls into this category of stuff you kind of have to be thinking about. It's time, it's money, and it's limiting, oftentimes in the context of a data warehouse, whereas with a data lake, it's since you don't have to spend all that time doing that up front, you can at any point say, we brought this water in here. We didn't even know what type of water it was. Now we are finding out that it's here and it's interesting. And so, as it's coming in, when it is that type of water, here's what to do with it without, a single forklift.
Yeah. And the other key piece of it is, and that makes it less expensive to own over time, is that it assumes that you're constantly experimenting and looking and discovering new value, and you're doing it in a way that doesn't disrupt the existing waterways. So found value in those things, and you want those to be static or reliable. And a lot of times, because of the way you have to combine data in a database or a data warehouse, you only have one copy of that data. But what if I need to slightly modify it to find value in another sort of waterway? The infrastructure that exists inside of a data lake protects the raw data, it protects the cleansed data, and it protects the aggregate data as separate things. And I can have n number of copies of that aggregated data that provide value, and I can add to those and modify them independently in a modular way without disrupting all the other waterways. And that's what you need to be able to scale, is not only do I need to discover things quickly, but as I accumulate those discoveries and those value points, I need to be able to maintain them in a way that's not going to bury me under the weight of that value, because I need to, accelerate that innovation in a year just as much as I need to do it today. And I think, the best practices that have evolved around data lakes just take a lot of that, the last 10 years of learning of how do you really turn data into a product and into a process and into a science, and sort of puts it all into one nice big package for us.
So we're doing a lot of this, and you and I are working a lot of times on these things. And so, in terms of what it means to people that might be listening, well, if you are a customer of ours or a potential customer of ours, right. Effectively, I guess the simplest way to say it is that our data strategy involves building this stuff out for our own internal infrastructure within our products, within our operations, all those sorts of things, but extending that effectively to customers to leverage as well. Obviously, it's not just a single lake, right? But everything's kind of connected. All the water in the world's connected. And
that's
and
right.
So it does effectively offer them, beyond the sort of benefits of the ability for our products to integrate within themselves, the ability for our products to integrate with the rest of the world. Beyond that, it is offering them this benefit of all those same things we've been talking about, with really no need for them to kind of do much at all, right? I mean,
that's right. Bring their data.
Have data is the requirement.
That's what
do you
they
have
have
data?
to do. And that you're in these conversations as much as I am with our customers are searching for ways to do that. And whether it's because they're starting to scale by having more funds or more entities, or whether they're an umbrella company, they've got 6 companies underneath, they're looking for ways to optimize the way they run business. And that almost always starts with data. And it almost always starts with the idea that there's some part of the way down the path. Nobody's starting out from I just do this data thing in my database. They've got some semblance of either a warehouse or a data lake, and it's being able to be flexible when it comes to how do we get them from where they are to where they need to be as quickly as sort of efficiently as possible.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, right? Because one of the things about the market we operate in is it's a service. At the end of the day, it's a financial service that this market provides to their customers. And service industries or markets are really interesting because they aren't like the let's experiment with a button here and see if people click it, or let's ship 1 million times a day to our website and find out what people are doing. Now you can certainly do those things, but I've used this analogy before, and I did get a little excited, and I remain excited about it, but I got a little obsessed with it some time ago about this idea of the impact that software, cloud, and now data has on service industries, especially highly competitive, highly fragmented ones, and even, both B2B and B2C. It's all about customer experience. This one that I was kind of mini obsessed with was veterinarians, right? Imagine the number of veterinarians. Do you know of a single brand? No. I mean, maybe can't think of the name now, but the inside Petco or PetSmart, Banfield or something like that. But otherwise, they are highly fragmented. It's every corner, and the consumer, the pet owner, has a million different choices. None of those consumers with those millions of choices are choosing which vet they go to because of like the sort of algo that was developed on the vet's website and which like forced them into it unknowingly, get in your car, turn it on, drive to this location and without knowing. And all of a sudden, no, it was like, well, I'm going to go to this vet. And into these service industries, whether it's B2B or B2C, of course, the impression all along is important, but like the experience you have is so key. And so like, I was always like, we had a Labrador that we took to a certain vet at one point, and we also then took the Labrador there for doggy daycare, and there was a pool, and there was another lab, and we would pick him up from doggy daycare, and we'd hear about his friend Cooper from the people at the daycare. But then we'd like go in to see the vet, and I was always just sitting there in the examination room, like watching the vet, like on this sort of old school, huge computer on like running like Windows 95, and I was always just like, I can't wait for the day when this person comes in with an iPad and is like, mentions Cooper. Like they had no way of knowing that information, And so like right. At the end of the day, that's technology process, data, and which enables people to create a better customer experience. That's all this market's, well, really any service, highly fragmented, competitive service market is all about creating a customer experience. And so, in this market, there is a lot of data. And I think, we talk about this, right? It's like, yeah, sure, that there is a whole thing about investment and decisioning and stuff like that that's really interesting with data. Given that limited partners pay general partners to make investment decisions, I think having those decisions be informed by data and, AI and stuff like that is great. There's a lot of potential in that. But also, like, let's not automate that fully, right? Like putting human context into it. So all of what I'm saying is the opportunity with data for people in this market doesn't have to be a like sort of futuristic science fiction film. It can be about being faster, more accurate, saving time and pain and potential error and risk and all those right. things. Yep. And about creating a better customer experience, whether it's doing all those things faster and better and with less risk and less, error to produce the same thing you had, or about creating a new thing. And that's, always been the vision. We talked a lot about it on the podcast behind Altvia, is about enabling GPs to create something for LPs that's differentiated and not just on time in the same format, but about creating this like, oh, wow, this is more like what I get as a consumer with these massive financial institutions like Schwab and, what have you, that are creating these technology-driven experiences for consumers because there's a lot of choices and it has to be cool. And now we enable GPs to do that by way of taking their data and helping them improve decisioning and stuff. But again, doesn't have to be this like super futuristic science fiction thing. It can be just about providing a better customer experience because that's what these markets do. For
sure. We obviously talk a lot about that. I think we're in an industry that's a little bit behind because they've been sort of preached to for 10 years about how hard data is, how expensive data is, because they pull in consultants to beef up their hours when it comes to that. But the truth is, like, data is pretty easy, especially when you take a data lake approach to it. It's pretty easy to get it into one place. And the key piece is being able to sort of do interesting things with it once it's in those. And, I think we get a lot of questions about AI because that's the buzzword of the year. And Altvia has said AI is interesting. It is, but it's also a little bit like hiring a recent MBA grad intern that's like super smart but has no clue about your business. And how do we fast track that AI to get experience? And in the AI world, experience is context. So it knows how to do things, but in a general way, but to be really useful, it has to know like when and why. And when and why comes from the data that you store in your business. And being able to centralize that means you can start to layer on things like ML, things like AI. Without the sort of fundamental data lake based foundation, all those things are like little shiny toys, and they can do cool little magic tricks, but they're not really fundamentally useful until they understand your business or understand your nuance or understand the way that you interact with your customers, the differentiation that you've already built. And that's why we sort of really leaned into the idea that data is the key. fun stuff. I mean, the other aspect of AI is that it's just evolving at a pace that's unlike anything you've ever seen. And if you don't have a foundation, a solid data lake foundation, it's like having, the latest toys, but you're going to break the bank trying to implement those things and then find out, oh, that's not supported anymore, or that's really evolved. The thing that used to work doesn't work as well because they've changed the underlying large language model or whatever those things are. So like for us, it's really like, let's get the data all into one place. Let's start doing some interesting things. If AI plays into that, great. If ML plays into that, great. Sometimes it's just knowing who to call next. What's the next thing to do? And that doesn't necessarily come from AI. And I think that all comes from data and context that you're not going to get without doing that sort of foundational work. And we're focused on figuring out how to make it cheap and easy to do it so that we can break that sort of industry belief that data is hard and slow and expensive, and so that we can get onto this sort of interesting, cool stuff of what do we do with it now that we've got it in one place.
We talk about this a lot, man. And then we decided that we would record it and put it on the podcast. And not surprisingly, super stimulating just to do it kind of formally here. There's all sorts of thoughts and all sorts of analogies, metaphors, and all sorts of things that get you excited. And I think that's representative of how we feel on a day-to-day basis and the stuff that we're working on. But, and I mentioned there's a big part of me that's like stimulated by learning things. But, when we set out to build this company years ago, it was like the personal thing to me was like, I don't think I knew that about the learner thing. I think it was present to a lesser degree then. But, it was like, point is I still remain, driven by this. But the impact that this can have on this market is, in some cases, kind of pretty basic. It's like, well, yeah, we're enabling you to create a better experience. And that's this thing because, early in my career, it felt like, man, it's pretty amazing how much money is moving around this market. And, as we've brought in people over the years and they've been a bit younger and they feel this desire to be connected to their work, it occurred to us that, like, they aren't tied to that like I was, not a thing that they'd felt and they didn't really care. And then it was sort of like, well, what becomes possible in the world if, the sort of market we're powering is this very quickly moving, very dynamic and very influential capital source that if we can make the process of LPs and GPs coming together and having coming together more efficiently, but also having a more efficient and dynamic relationship, and then powering the GPs to not have to worry about that so they can focus on other things. And then also the technology can help them focus on better decisioning and better processing and stuff with technology and data. What becomes possible? Like, is it that big of a stretch to think that maybe that can power the world's, next greatest innovation, maybe like a cure to some sort of novel unmet disease, or create the next company that solves a climate problem? Whatever it is. It's like, I don't really know, and we don't have to know what it does. It's reasonable to assume that if we play that part, that is a possibility, and great. That helps me get fired up.
Yeah, for sure. Same here. I mean, time, you're talking about time. It's a fixed resource, and our customers have a limited amount of it, and they can deploy it dealing with their LPs and strengthening that relationship, or they can spend it figuring out how to deploy that capital in meaningful ways. And we're trying to figure out how to get them to focus their time away from the menial aspects of running a business and more on the pieces, like you said, that you can't automate, that you need a person in there that has that context and experience. And it's really around deploying the capital, figuring out how to change the world through the investments that they're making.
Well, brother, this has been a pleasure, very fun. Thank you for coming to work here, man. Thank you for having the spirit you do, for taking the positions you do, and saying the things you do. It's a joy to work with you and have you be a part of the team.
No, it's been fun. I wasn't blowing smoke when I said this is a great team. I'm really happy I made the decision and haven't regretted it for a minute, and looking forward to the things we're going to be able to do together in 2024.
Well, the feeling's very mutual, brother. Thank you, and get on with it now and keep doing it.
Thanks for listening to Preferred Return. If you found this episode thought-provoking, consider subscribing wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about today's topic or for additional takeaways to own your technology edge, visit altvia.com. That's altvia.com. We're back next month with another episode, so stick around and let's make sure you get that preferred return.